The largest nuclear submarine humanity has ever built barely stretches 175 meters. Yet, in the 3,100-meter hell of the deep, our sonar locked onto an unknown leviathan below, 270 meters long. It wasn't a submarine, nor a colossal whale, but a living organism, constantly splitting and deforming within itself. Most despairingly, it ignored the submarine's physical defenses, directly invading our bones and brains with 19 Hz infrasound, singing us a bizarre, low-frequency aria. The military once threatened me with a schizophrenia diagnosis to keep me silent. But the entity, codenamed Abyss Watcher, is real, and the most terrifying part is, it knows exactly where we are now. I'm a sonar technician second class. That day, on midwatch, I sat in the sonar room, 9 screens before me awash with green bearing lines. Headphones clamped tight against my skull, sealed airtight, the passive sonar array devouring the ocean's gut rumblings. In the distance, the mechanical beat of merchant ship propellers. From the upper layers, the delicate crunch of shrimp swarms feeding on plankton. Deeper still, the alternating calls of North Pacific orcas. Everything swaddled in a blanket of white noise, routine to the point of drowsiness. Until that line appeared. At first, it wasn't a thing, just an extremely narrow, low-frequency signal, trembling around 50 Hz, occasionally streaking across the very bottom of the waterfall display. I adjusted the filter gain, assuming it was a blue whale. Only a blue whale's vocal cords could emit such a deep, drawn-out groan, capable of shaking sonar buoys into a several-mile wake. But blue whales don't hover motionless in a 3,100-meter cold water layer. Blue whales don't descend precisely 42 meters per hour, then descend 42 meters, maintaining an absolutely perfect vertical rhythm, as if breathing at some frequency we couldn't comprehend. In that moment, no one spoke in the control room, but everyone, one by one, set down their coffee cups, their gazes fixed on the instruments before them. This was the genesis, a plunge from absolute routine into absolute strangeness. And what truly jolts me awake in the early hours, years later, isn't the physical phenomena that followed, nor the pressure readings beyond metal fatigue limits, nor the captain shouted code words into the comms link, destined for no reply. It was when that thing first spoke. I don't mean it spoke words. I mean it emitted a sound signature, a vibrational frequency that passive sonar couldn't filter out, and active sonar, when fired at it, seemed swallowed by an abyss. It passed through the hull and into my eardrums, like someone had pushed a cathedral organ down into the infrasonic range, below the threshold of human hearing, causing the fluid in my cochlea to churn in defiance of fluid dynamics. My skin prickled, the hairs on my neck stood on end, as if countless unseen fingers were gently scraping the inside of my skull. That sensation, I later read a term for it in a brief classified as abnormal underwater contact, non-volitional autonomic fear response. Put simply, it's when your body understands, a split second before your brain does, you are no longer at the top of the food chain. My name is Michael Trace. In 2006, I was 31, with 12 years in the Navy, my sonar qualifications ranking top 3 in the squadron. I could distinguish a humpback whale's mating song from the pumpjet propulsion noise of a Russian Akula-class submarine, and discern the spectral difference between a seamount collapse and an enemy deploying a low-frequency jammer. I wasn't easily rattled. But everything that happened that night utterly shattered my perception of reality, forcing me into a decade of silence, unable to reveal details to anyone, not even my therapist. And today, I'm going to tell you everything. Not to prove anything, but simply, while I'm still alive, to reclaim the truth of what lies in that depth for myself. Our mission profile, it turns out, was already steeped in something sinister. Before we deployed, during the final brief at Naval Base Guam, the commanding officer, we called him Captain, Commander James Holloway, gave a short, classified update. He said that over the past 18 months, Allied submarines operating in the area had repeatedly reported acoustic anomalies, which had been provisionally dismissed by command as environmental interference. But I dug around with my sonar intelligence analyst colleagues and learned that 2 Japanese JMSDF Soria-class submarines had experienced brief propulsion system failures in the same waters, and an Australian Collins-class boat had picked up an inexplicable biological sound signature at depths below 2,500 meters. Bioacoustic signature was a bureaucratic term. It meant not a submarine, not an unmanned underwater vehicle, not known geological activity. It meant something alive was making a sound, and that sound didn't belong to any species in humanity's current database. The most unsettling part was that every sonar man who had ever encountered that signature refused to re-enter those waters. After the briefing, Lieutenant Colonel Holloway kept me behind. "Trace," he said, "I know you've got the best ears. Once we're down there, if you hear anything that doesn't match known acoustic signatures, report directly to me, not through the operations officer." He paused, as if weighing whether to finish the rest of the sentence. "And whatever you hear, don't try to ping it with active sonar." "Captain, why?" He looked at me with an expression I'd never seen in a professional military man's eyes before. Not fear, but awe. "Because someone did ping it. The first thing they did when they got back was request a transfer out of the submarine service." The descent of the Santa Fe wasn't like the movies. No alarms or red lights. The depth gauge numbers calmly ticked up. 2,800 meters. 2,900 meters. 3,000 meters. Beyond 1,500 meters, the ocean had completely lost its color. Even the ghostly bioluminescent plankton had vanished. Outside the viewport, there was only an absolute black, so profound that if you stared into it for more than 10 seconds, you'd start to doubt if your own retinas were still working. I'd cranked the imaging sensor to maximum gain once, and the screen showed something like a starless night sky, no, emptier than that. It was an absence of matter, a negation of existence. Once we reached our mission station, we entered silent running mode. The internal temperature was deliberately lowered to reduce thermal signatures from electronic equipment, and all talking had to be reduced to a whisper. The reactor coolant pumps were shut down, with basic life support systems maintained by batteries. 42 crewmen became like 42 moving corpses, shifting slowly under the eerie blue emergency lights. You could hear your own heartbeat, transmitted through the stethoscope affecting to your ear canal, thump thump, thump thump, measuring every second more faithfully than any clock. It was in that dead silence that the acoustic signature began to sharpen. It didn't appear suddenly. It had always been there, like a colossal mural projected onto the sonar spectrum, but I only gained the resolution to truly see it at a certain moment. It was composed of 3 frequency layers. The bottom layer was an extremely low-frequency vibration around 10 Hz, close to a fin whale's fundamental frequency, but the waveform was too regular, like an artificially modulated carrier signal. The middle layer consisted of intermittent pulses, appearing every 1-2 seconds, with a bandwidth spanning 52 to 58 Hz, a frequency band typically associated with diesel submarine noise, yet its harmonic structure showed no characteristics of mechanical repetition. Instead, it resembled some kind of muscle tissue rhythmically contracting. The top layer completely defied my understanding of acoustics. A series of discrete click sounds, progressively increasing in frequency, each lasting less than half a millisecond, yet capable of drawing a vertical bright line on the waterfall display, as if something was emitting a highly directional sonar beam, scanning us again and again. I turned up my headset volume 2 notches, then froze solid. Those click sounds weren't random scanning. Their pulse repetition frequency was approaching congruence with our boat's passive sonar array's detection frequency. It was probing us, measuring our electronic skin, inch by inch, in a way only a sonar man could understand. I raised my hand, signaling for the chief sonar man to come over. His name was Davis, 20 years in the Navy, with more seasoned ears than mine. He plugged a spare headset into my console, closed his eyes, and listened for 30 seconds. Then he took off the headset, picked up a pen, and wrote a line on the corner of the chart table. "Don't make a sound. Get the captain." Lieutenant Colonel Holloway ducked into the sonar room, his face impassive, but his breathing rhythm betrayed him, his chest rising and falling shallower and faster than usual, the typical ventilation pattern of someone forcibly suppressing adrenaline. I didn't offer him the headset. I switched the spectrum projection directly to the main display. the cursor boxed in the anomalous signature. The captain stared at the screen for 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15 seconds. Then he did something I had never seen a submarine commander do. He reached out and personally switched off the comm circuit between the sonar room and the control room, which meant that only Davis and I would hear the conversation that followed. "Can we get a range from a 2-station crossfix?" he asked. "No, sir." I shook my head. "Passive arrays can't get precise ranging on non-cooperative targets, and this contact isn't above the thermocline. It's below us." "How far below?" "The computer models can't give an exact figure. The sound propagation is too distorted. Conservatively, 2,000 to 2,500 meters. My teeth bit into my tongue as I spoke the number. We're already at 3,000 meters. That thing's estimated depth is below 5,000 meters. That means it's in the abyssal zone of the Philippine Trench, a world no human has ever laid eyes on. Holloway was silent for a moment, then stared at the bulkhead for a long time. I knew what he was thinking. The Santa Fe's maximum test depth is roughly 2,400 meters. Our current position had severely overdrawn the hull's safety margin. Were it not for the black classified stamp on the mission orders, no captain would ever take a Los Angeles-class submarine to this depth. And less than 2 nautical miles below us, a silhouette outlined by an unknown acoustic signature hung steadily in the deeper abyss, like a spider squatting at the bottom of a well, staring up at the flies crawling past the opening. "Does it know we're here?" the captain asked. Davis pursed his lips, pointing to the regular clicking sounds at the top of the spectrum. "Not only does it know, sir, it's currently using high-frequency pulses to acoustically image us. If we translate its method of detection into human terms, it's feeling our faces." Then everything fell briefly silent. The silence I heard wasn't an absence of sound, but a strange emptiness, as if even the white noise had been sucked away by something. The ocean's ambient noise transmitted through my sonar headset, attenuated by about 12 decibels within seconds, as if the entire ocean were holding its breath. This feeling was unlike anything I'd experienced in my decade-plus sonar career, like walking through a dense forest at midnight and suddenly realizing all the insect chirps had ceased simultaneously. You know you can't see anything, yet you're acutely aware that something is watching you. It was then I began to ponder the question I shouldn't have been pondering, the boundary between reality and illusion. Those of us who've spent too long in the military want to believe the world is a standardized combat map. Longitude, latitude, depth, target type, threat level, rules of engagement, win and go home, lose and be buried at sea. We compress all unknowns into acronyms and short codes, using radar cross-sections, acoustic signature databases, and weapon envelopes to construct a predictable universe. But we forget that a map is not the territory. The ocean doesn't read our field manuals. In 3,100 meters of dark abyss, all human sensors are but matches in a blind man's hand, while the entity before you needs no eyes at all. I murmured the thought to Davis, my voice barely above a whisper, almost a soliloquy. He didn't answer, merely sketching a pattern unconsciously in the logbook before him, over and over. Later, I glimpsed the book. He was drawing spiral-shaped circles, each layer dotted with evenly spaced points, resembling some kind of celestial orbit I couldn't comprehend. "If it just stays there, we stay put." Holloway finally spoke. "Maintain silent running, record all acoustic data, and await orders from command." But the thing clearly had no intention of waiting. On the passive sonar waterfall display, that cluster of extremely low-frequency signals suddenly began to change waveform. Its frequency slowly climbed, shifting from 10 Hz to 13 Hz, then sliding to 17 Hz. With each change, the corresponding upper layer pulses would reconfigure into a new envelope structure, like a singer adjusting their vocal cords, testing the sound, searching for a frequency that could couple with us. That's when my headache started. First, a dull ache rose from the base of my skull, then spread to both temples, before stabbing down into my upper jaw. I pressed a hand to my forehead, feeling a clammy layer of cold sweat. The other 2 sonar operators in the control room also began rubbing their eyes and foreheads. One suddenly turned his head and dry heaved. 3,000 meters of water pressure wouldn't directly affect the human body inside the sub, but in that moment, I desperately wanted to believe something had burrowed inside our heads. Then, the low-frequency sound abruptly stabilized at 19 Hz. 19 Hz. I knew that number all too well. It was the resonant frequency of the human ocular vitreous humor. NASA had mentioned it in an early aerospace medical study. If a 19 Hz subsonic wave were coupled to the human body at a specific sound pressure level, it could induce visual hallucinations. The eyeballs would begin to micro-tremor at their natural frequency. The retinal imaging neurons would generate erroneous motion perception signals, and people would see things that simply weren't there. I was starting to see things. Not a clear image, but a shadow lurking at the edge of my vision. In the bottom right corner of the sonar screen, something wet and black seemed to ride. In the corridor outside the control room, the blue glow of the emergency lights seemed momentarily eclipsed by some translucent form. I dismissed it as a hallucination born of fatigue, until I saw Lieutenant Colonel Holloway snap his head around, staring for 3 agonizing seconds at the empty space behind him. He licked his chapped lips, said nothing, but I knew he'd seen it too. "Captain, contact is ascending." I blurted it out, my eyes fixed on the depth estimation curve. All extraneous thoughts were instantly severed by this new data, the control room snapping back into the instinctive rhythm of a military unit. The thing was ascending, not fast, about 10 meters per minute, but its trajectory was unwavering, a direct course for the Santa Fe Esquile. "Is the ascent rate stable?" Holloway asked. "Too stable to be natural, sir. Like controlled buoyancy regulation. Analyze contact dimensions." I deployed the lateral array and the home-mounted Trinor subarrays for beamforming. The computer gnawed laboriously on the delayed data, spitting out a flickering number. I thought the software had crashed, restarted the algorithm, but the result was identical. The acoustic shadow length of the contact, if the thing was indeed solid, exceeded 270 meters. 270 meters. Our Los Angeles-class submarine was 110 meters bow to stern. This unknown underwater contact was longer than 2.5 Santa Fe's laid end-to-end. It wasn't a whale. The largest blue whale barely topped 30 meters. It wasn't a submarine. Humanity's largest, the Typhoon-class nuclear sub, was only 175 meters. It wasn't any known geological anomaly, because no rock ascends at a steady 10 meters per minute while simultaneously assaulting your optic nerves with a 19 Hz frequency. "Captain, I need you to make a decision." Lieutenant Commander Malloy's voice came from the control station, his tone level, but his words direct. He held the operations manual in his hand, but it lay unopened, because this manual had no entry for this. There were only 3 options. 1. Maintain silence and let it approach. 2. Activate active sonar, hit it with a high decibel pulse to get a clear picture, but that meant exposing our precise position and intent if it proved hostile. 3. Engage the reactor's primary coolant pumps, jettison ballast, and emergency surface, but that meant abandoning the entire mission, and the risk of uncontrolled decompression during a 3,000-meter ascent was enough to tear the entire boat apart. I stared at the slowly approaching cursor on the screen, and in that moment, Holloway's warning before we deployed flashed through my mind. "Don't try to ping it with active sonar." I looked at him, and he looked back at me, a silent war unfolding in his eyes. On one side, the rigorous discipline of a 25-year career officer. On the other, the primal urge of a man facing the unspeakable. Finally, he clenched his back teeth and nodded. Not at me. At Malloy. "Active sonar, single directional pulse, 40% power. I don't need high resolution, just confirmation of range and outline." Malloy repeated the order. Everyone in sonar immediately synchronized their procedures. I was responsible for modulating the pulse waveform. Davis controlled the aiming of the transmit array. We focused the beam directly below, setting the power far below combat standard, partly to avoid provoking whatever it was, partly because the sound velocity gradient in deep water was notoriously erratic, and ultra-high energy could produce unexpected nonlinear effects. Firing countdown 3, 2, 1, fire. 32 transducers simultaneously unleashed a blast of compressed acoustic energy. It felt like someone had slammed a sledgehammer against your coffin lid, your entire being recoiling from the assault on your senses. An active sonar pulses an amplified version of the human audible range. At full power in shallow water, it could rupture a diver's lungs. Even at 40%, it still made the entire submarine's interior reverberate with a teeth-grinding resonance. The echo took less than 3 seconds to return. But for the computer to fully reconstruct the image, we waited a full 11 seconds. The outline that slowly materialized on the screen shattered every piece of marine biology common sense I'd accumulated in my entire life. That thing wasn't streamlined, not torpedo-shaped, nor any soft, tubular structure of a deep-sea creature. Sonar returns showed a highly regular, polyhedral structure, somewhat like crystallized basalt, but its surface was too smooth, its edges too sharp. Its main body was a colossal inverted cone, from whose apex radiated at least 12 symmetrically arranged ridged protrusions. Each ridge terminated in a spherical node, subtly shifting its relative position, as if undergoing a continuous, slow morphological adjustment. It had no discernible thrusters, no fins or tail equivalents, yet it was ascending at a steady pace. What plunged the control room into deeper silence was the inverted cone's interior. Active sonar penetrated its outer layer. Returns from the inner layer showed severe phase distortion, indicating a multitude of fluid-filled or hollow cavities within, and these chambers were not static. They slowly deformed like a flowing lava lamp, splitting, merging, then splitting again, completing a cyclical morphology in mere seconds that our life support systems would take days to achieve. The scene on the sonar screen was a live dissection of a thinking blob of ink. And the acoustic analysis software, running in the back end, flagged a separate warning. All internal chamber movements were perfectly synchronized, beating to the rhythm of that 19 Hz low-frequency wave. "It's breathing?" Davis's voice trembled like a skiff cut loose from its anchor. I knew exactly what he meant. We weren't looking at a vessel, or an animal. This could be living tissue. Living tissue, nearly 300 meters long, hovering in the abyss, observing us with infrasound. Then it began to glow. Not the phosphorescent, greenish chemical reaction of bioluminescence. It was an intensely deep crimson, igniting from the tips of the ridge nodes, like 12 tungsten lamps slowly unscrewing in the deep-sea soup. The light was so dim, absorbed by the water until only a blurred halo remained, yet so vast it illuminated the entire abyssal trench beneath the Santa Fe. I had never feared light so much. In that moment, I would have preferred utter darkness to seeing what it illuminated. Sonar returns refreshed, this time with Doppler measurements appended. The 270-meter mass was no longer merely ascending at a steady pace. It was accelerating. And it had adjusted its orientation, the inverted cone's apex now precisely aligned with our submarine's center of gravity. Simultaneously, the low-frequency sound jumped from 19 Hz to 21.5 Hz, another resonant frequency, this time for the bones in our hands. My fingertips began to spasm uncontrollably. Not just mine. Several hands in the control room twitched faintly, as if muscles had been implanted with an alien bioelectricity. I felt an intense itching beneath my fingernails, as if something were trying to push my phalanges outward from within. This wasn't merely a physiological sensation. It was the deepest violation, like the most intimate parts of your body suddenly being brazenly played by an external will. "Shut it down!" Holloway roared, referring to the active sonar. We did. But the deep crimson light didn't vanish, nor did the low-frequency vibration diminish. In fact, without our assistance, it amplified itself until the hull began to resonate. The anechoic tiles on the hull side walls showed visible micro-displacements. Certain securing bolts began to emit high-pitched shrieks. The crushing pressure of the sea, the infrasonic oscillations, and the approaching behemoth combined to turn the entire submarine into a toy shaken in the palm of a god. The lights inside the sub flickered 3 times, then died completely, switching to the deep crimson of the emergency battery lamps. This crimson, mingling with the deep red seeping through the portholes from the colossal mass beneath us, stained everyone's faces the color of putrid flesh. Someone began to whisper prayers. Others clamped their hands over their mouths. I heard a muffled impact from the engine room, followed by a cooling system alarm, then abnormal readings from the ballast tanks. We were losing depth control, the entire submarine sinking as if into a mass of gelatin denser than seawater, slowly but irresistibly dragged downward by some force field. The depth gauge plunged to 3,200 meters, 3,300, 3,450. The hull emitted a continuous, almost weeping metallic groan. We all knew this class's design limits had long been surpassed. Every meter descended could be the last. Lieutenant Commander Holloway, in that moment, did what only a true captain would. He abandoned all illusions of external rescue, shouldering the entire sub's survival once more onto himself alone. Shut down all non-essential power and electronic emissions. Kill every noise-generating system on board, including ventilation fans and circulation pumps. All hands, absolute silence. His orders came out clipped, each word hammered from beneath a sheet of ice. From this moment, we are a rock. A rock at 3,500 meters on the seabed. We do not think, we do not breathe, we do not exist. We complied. I unplugged my sonar headphones. Even their faint electrical hum could betray us. The entire boat plunged into a stillness so profound it felt like death. No machine vibration, no human voice, no water circulation, only 40-odd beating hearts, flesh and blood suspended on a wire about to snap. Then we began to hear it. Not through any electronic equipment, not through any sensors. It coupled low-frequency signals directly into the submarine's metal hull, turning the entire pressure vessel into a massive, primal loudspeaker. The sound surged from above, below, and all around simultaneously, no longer a mere vibration, but a tonality with clear structure, a prolonged harmony like monks chanting in a cathedral, yet its scales defied the 12-tone equal temperament, its melodic structure violating every rule of human music across millennia. It enveloped your body, slowly dissolving you like water dissolves a sugar cube. I couldn't describe the experience as hearing. I felt it with every bone, every tooth, every lymph node, and every nerve in my spine. In that moment, for the first and only time in my life, I ceased to believe humanity stood at the apex of cognition. I had always thought the most terrifying thing in the universe was discovering you weren't alone in the dark. I was wrong. The most terrifying thing is discovering the dark itself is trying to communicate with you. We were trapped in that abyssal area for 17 full minutes. Holloway later told the investigative committee it was a few minutes, and Malloy scribbled 12 minutes in his unsubmitted private notes. But I watched the numbers tick by on the tactical display, 17 minutes and 9 seconds. During that time, our depth didn't increase. It seemed to simply hover approximately 300 meters below us, its inverted conical apex aimed directly at us, maintaining a precise standoff distance, then emitting that long, complex sound wave. Like a patient teacher, repeatedly explaining some colossal theorem to an insect that had blundered into class, while all we could comprehend was the insignificance of our own intellect. Years later, I read a phrase in a declassified Soviet Navy archive. Deep hypnotic contact. It was the term used by a KGB psychological assessment team after the K-131 submarine encountered a USO in the Arctic Ocean in 1982. My spine went cold reading those black-inked Russian translations, because the described symptoms were an exact match for what we experienced: distorted sense of time, somatic hallucinations, persistent infrasound frequencies coupled with subconscious arousal, and ultimately, an uncontrollable, potent urge to respond to the unknown utterance. Yes, at the 17-minute mark, I found myself opening my mouth, trying to emit some sound, to answer the infrasound that enveloped us. Not language, not a scream, but a guttural sound squeezed from the most primitive depths of my vocal cords, a vibration I'd never learned yet felt inexplicably familiar. If Davis hadn't clamped down on my wrist, using every ounce of his strength to drag my consciousness back to the control room, I might have become part of that chorus. He told me my eyes had rolled back completely, my lips were silently writhing, and my facial muscles twitched in a way that wasn't human. Then he pointed out the viewport. The dark red light was receding, not extinguishing abruptly. but retracting segment by segment into the interior of those spinal nodes, like an eye slowly closing. The intensity of the low-frequency sound gently subsided, retreating from the bone-resonating infrasound to the very edge of audibility. The depth gauge began its slow reversal, 3,420 meters, 3,300 meters, 3,100 meters. We were ascending, but not under our own power. The sonar screen marked the echo contour of the colossal object. It was smoothly descending in a way we couldn't comprehend, sinking back into the deeper reaches of the Philippine Trench. It was releasing us. Or more accurately, its interest in us had simply vanished.